Chill here with Sirius Talis Moon, and this is Jupiter, our soul day. Jupiter is 22 in the fifth house, squaring Chiron in Aries, and the moon is in the middle decan of Capricorn, mid-heaven ruled by Jupiter at 19 degrees Sagittarius, and the ascendant is conjoining Rahu, um, ruled by Jupiter. It is a great time to have mass slaughter teachings. And so, Jupiter's philosophy and teachings, and it's in the sign of Cancer, which on a mundane level means genocide. So let's talk about one of the greatest criticism towards NATO military alliance, and what prompted me to press record um, and to start with this episode, because I was planning to do a 2030 agenda episode, but this is um, basically just just a headline talking about the Yugoslav collapse and NATO's role in it. Okay, or NATO's Great Kosovo Crime by Dr. Sandra Davidovic. Um, I didn't watch the video yet. Okay, it's one of those things where I'm very aware that the Uranus in Gemini chart, whether it's of a country or of a military alliance, is going to be provoking civil wars. But I want to touch on a topic that no mockingbird can discuss, and that is the connection to the particular episode in Annika Luka's podcast with Sven Koll. So, how was it possible for NATO to supposedly intervene? Why am I saying supposedly intervene? Because to create chaos, it has to be there. We talk about Bosnia and Herzegovina, we talk about Yugoslavia, we're talking about Israel-Palestine, we're talking about Indo-Pakistan, okay? We're talking about Sudan. um, or Cream Ukraine, or Cream Russia, or Finland Naziland, which basically is the Finland that had to cooperate with Hitler just so not to fall into Stalin's hand. And I think about the fact that Finland could have been a part of the USSR. so, so when we are talking about, okay, I just want you to envision the word Israel-Palestine or Indo-Pakistan. I think the Israel-Palestine is, or the fact that it was called Palestine is now being, put to a lot of discussion. But just think about the unit name Israel-Palestine. That's Yugoslavia. They couldn't do anything that wasn't originally there. Think about apartheid and the pre-colonial or pre-apartheid bloodline segregation that existed among black community in South Africa. There was a particular, Nelson Mandela was of a particular lineage that was of the rulers, but he could not become a monarch. A monarch. Yes, a monarch. Well, he was a part of instilling democracy. He also married intra-tribally, okay, but not within the tribe. So, when we talk about the so-called external intervention, we are actually talking about something that required for another layer of sovereignty and received that through a bargain. Okay, on the colloquial world level, we can talk about women's right to vote, okay, and the suffragists. The suffragists got their right to vote because they bargained being taxed. The men did not get the sovereignty from taxation because they bargained still raping women under the guise of marriage or sex work. And this is where what gets me to how could have any military alliance, and underneath the word military alliance, it's funded by the wealth of nation, with the wealth of nations, which is basically dependent on energy, and that's the wealth consolidation of natural resources. By energy, I mean not just oil and gas, but also rare earth minerals. A shout out to the historical coin, the financial coin, on YouTube, talking about salt. I think it was either that channel or another channel talking about salt. It was actually in the Tsar days in Russia, and the fact that without salt, people couldn't preserve meat. Without salt, people couldn't prepare technology because it's a crystalline form. The traditional form of doing many of the crafts was lost due to the loss of salt that was an inherent ingredient in the old ways of comprising these technologies of food preservations and other technologies needed for the sustenance of human lives self-sufficiently. So rare earth minerals are the modern form of salt. And this is where the wealth consolidation later. There is no NATO conversation without my mom. um, the wealth consolidation that I keep talking about for a year and a half, ever since I connected the dots, which was by the aid of testimonies like Anneke Lucas and the Trudy Verstegen, um, banking whistleblowers, okay, and usually when I don't see an ongoing conversation, I will not put, fire upon a person's name unless I see them actively promoting the discussion because people can have, I don't know, breaks or rest or whatever. Um, it doesn't mean that I don't give credit. It just means that I um, try to be attuned, okay, to whether a person's publicly raising this topic or not as survivor. And when it comes to the wealth consolidation, basically the only way to get to the relevant countries and extort what people call lobbying, which is basically extortion, was done by applying to the men that sleep with very young children and then extorting money. Whether it's by these children having been at the edge of puberty and becoming pregnant, and I think Sven called for that because he was a man that was used, a boy that was used wearing girls' clothes to basically be raped in these extortion calls when the girls would get pregnant. And in every nation where there are people that would do that to a child, the nation is liable to be extorted. Now, once they got the person, the wealth is funneled not to the military alliance, to the natural resources wealth consolidation. Some of them are oil companies, gas companies, energy companies. Some of them rare earth mineral production and transportation companies. Some of them the ruling elite and aristocracy that's invested in or has supposedly the right to, the ability to enforce. And this is where the military comes into notion. I'm not even talking about NATO. The clergy, okay, and with that type of wealth funneling and extortion, regimes can fall down. In fact, we're very nearing um, February 14. We're very nearing Saturn Neptune on 0 degree Aries, which is a total collateral, not just regime but also banking collapse, that is scheduled to bring in supposedly a new currency or supposedly a new world order. Um, and I want to have a series dedicated to Agenda 2030. While we have Rahu in Pisces that squares Rahu in Sagittarius, where it will be in 2030, there is the European Territorial Cohesion Plan. That's a shit ton of words that I would need to translate into how did we get here from extortion cults. And there is the square between the Rahus, which is something that I still need to assess because it's right now, this cycle of eclipses is a growth crisis towards 2030. And when we understand the role of extortion cults, we understand that definitely would get people to be in the hands of chaos agents. You cannot have cohesion without sexual sovereignty, that in spirit and in matter, and in ritual. Okay, what they call a cult. There's a reason that Sagittarius is trine in Leo and Aries. Aries is about the individual sovereignty. It's a Mars sign, but Mars here means the I am identity and sexual. Okay, so that's definitely something, and I would say that because my midheaven is sitting pretty on the galactic center, trining transit in Aries. If I say that, I'm more than on the money. I'm on the core of energy. I'm on the eye that watches the eye that watches. And I'm not saying it's been an easy transit. It's conjunct. The Aries is conjuncting my ruler of 7th and 4th, okay, which is literally my housing and partner or enemy and or both. There's a reason why they say couples should learn how to argue, but both staying alive. Um, but this is something that I have been definitely definitely a part of. Okay, and we cannot have cohesion without individual sovereignty. This is why settings like even for men or women, state house dad or state house mom, for people that are pinpointed by this galactic center or Aries transiting Aries at the end of Aries, is highly unlikely to work because we are the people that are pinpointed to have individual sovereignty. And we need to walk our talk, which is transmuting our own traumas and issues around those things. So when we talk about the case for Yugoslavia, and we talk about the dissolution of Yugoslavia, which is the same timeline of Uranus in Gemini, and the 7 years where NATO will have Uranus return, but so do the countries that have Uranus Gemini. Israel, United States. Okay, I call it civil war o'clock for a reason, and many more countries. All the while, that Uranus Gemini is mixed in with the timeline that aspires to cohesion, to territorial cohesion. Okay, you think about Civil War o'clock. The territorial cohesion of United States was preserved after the Civil War due to abolition of slavery and a lot of bargains to do with currency in the Jesuits that probably still need to be pinpointed. But the agrarians did not have a one-up because there would still be human trafficking on agrarian land. Okay, that they were not basically morally superior to the Jesuits in any way, shape, or form. Namely the Mormons. Namely the people that run the show. If you watch the ex-Mormon who sold her eternal life for coffee, then she talks about the Mormon face, then you watch Bill Clinton, and with or without the dress. Um, Epstein in red and blue. But so um, so Uranus Gemini tells us that there is a trade bargain where to undo the undermining, one would have to tend to the child trafficking extortion codes. And the fact that human trafficking is simply the children that got older. Okay? Which means we're talking about the same phenomenon continuum. Not even a continuum, it's the same phenomenon. It's not even separate. Okay? That's why, by the way, when people like Annika Lucas got deprogrammed with the aid of a person that was a part of organized crime, by the way, then she was told to never have sex for money or resources. Which is, by the way, it's the best blessing of her life. This is how because she was programmed to not ever make money on her own, but not having sex for money or resources is a part of unlocking the sexual sovereignty that makes wealth. That's root chakra, and the second sex chakra is relational chakra, which are the throat chakra, which is why speaking the truth is preserving also the second chakra, and the interconnectedness or divine love or divine motherly love that is connected with the root chakra, the survivalistic needs and the sense of interconnectedness that the buried alive and dead and other rituals are trying to sever. Okay, this is why they get the children buried into the soil to try to disconnect them and try to dissociate them from any sense of near-death experience that they could remember that would preserve the connection that would not enable them to perform such heinous crimes in praxis. Okay, love, void of love. Okay, that's the difference between evil and benevolence. So once we understand that before NATO, before oil companies, before any of that, they were people that slept with children. And we will not have territorial cohesion as long as that happens for any longer than is serving only several parts of the elite, but not the common people. Also, when we talk about sexual sovereignty, not just talking about the physical, but also the why the Me Too only was partially successful, because the Me Too did not tackle cult. I'm not talking cult, talking occult. I was the one person that did academically, and my study on ESP. And to be very honest, I did not even discover anything. The Google Scholar was already there, connecting trauma to decreased somatic experience, which means our five senses, and increased extrasensory perception, which simply means that the hypervigilance got us attuned to different frequencies that we don't normally need for our survival. That being said, those frequencies can be attuned to upon cohesion with embodiment, and in fact, when they are, there is an intelligence advantage. And I talk about the case of Finland after the Second World War, but they did everything wrong regarding schizophrenia, and then they did housing first, independent of ability to work, believing the patient and helping them with support system. They can't say it, but that's the way Finland preserved its sovereignty in the face of the KGB. Because the KGB, like many other intelligences, rapes the espionages. It does the MK Ultra, it does something alongside the MK Ultra upon the training of the spies, which is why it is inferior to sexual sovereignty, that yields cohesive intelligence time after time after time. And if you ask why are people like Annika Lucas allowed to speak, because she has that cohesion, and they want to see what comes out of her, what can be read by her, but they would need to use psychic awareness by people that are not raped. Another groundbreaking interview goes several years backwards, an interview that Gigi Young on her channel, Gigi Young on YouTube, has with a lady that discusses the training of the CIA to ESP, and the fact that when people were asked to misuse their psychic abilities, they were not able to perform. On my study that I did on ESP cultivation and the CIA case studies, basically the fear of doing that outside the church, and the fact that extrasensory are senses, and testing for them as any other research does not work because they work like senses. So that's what I found. But G.D. Young interviewed a lady that really discovered another thing that was not mentioned in the declassified interviewed and the ESP studies, which I looked into in my academic research. Now, fundamentally, if we want to create territorial cohesion, whether we talk about the case of Yugoslavia, first of all, we would have to think not tribally. That means Yugoslavia, Israel, Palestine, Indo-Pakistan, Sudan. Same thing applies to European Union or Europe. Treason cult is treason cult. Now, what's fascinating about the European case is the prospective prediction of civil war-like slavery abolishing struggle for 7 years a la United States, and this is something that can be facilitated by the fiscal political connection to NATO's NATO chart. That would entail polarity in NATO, which I talked about. It began to happen when Uranus was in Gemini, um, and is about to continue. Uranus is going to meet Sedna, and that's the 10th house of NATO. And so, yes, Rahu with Lilith and Chiron and Aries crossing that Rahu Lilith of NATO's chart. I said it from the moment I saw NATO's chart. Okay, it's exactly this type of training that permeates the soldiers, those that create the surveillance technologies that later become civilian surveillance technologies. Later, I'm being so fucking tender with my interpretation. Um, and that means tending to the very extortion cult. And for NATO's survival, it's essential because there's not another century of Gladio. Gladio was enmeshed with NATO. Now, if we're talking about the regional collapsing into collective global cohesion, we're simply talking about another layer of analysis that is not too different from the Yugoslavia level of analysis on the extortion cause basis, which is why a world war right now, because it's not just on women's rights or suffragists, but on freedom from sexual exploitation of children, which creates human trafficking, what they call the oldest profession in history. It's about that. And Sedna is in once in 12th millennia, sextile with the world degree, and Saturn Neptune in the farthest history that we can computate in any approachable program, has not conjoined in 0 degree Aries, which is the world degree. So we are talking about the fact that what's underlying the war is a complete change in the way humanity is, which can put humanity to extinction. But actually, when you think about it, actually nobody really has to die. The only reason people would die is because they insist on sleeping with 12 years old. Even the solutions to pedophilia, whether it's Prime Minister Maloney that talks about a partial chemical castration that may or may not be reversible, and but people are already talking about solutions to pedophilia because they know that legalizing pedophilia, first of all, the reason they can't legalize pedophilia, by the way, is because of extortion cults. The extortion cults work on the courtesan-partisan division. So whether it's the whore in the bedroom or whore in the brothel, but she has to be, or somewhere, else else she cannot be a part of society, division of women and sexuality. Or we're talking about the division of we must make pedophilia a terrible, 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 punishable crime. It's the worst of humanity, which, by the way, it is. Okay, there's a reason why they use pedophilia, why they use sex with children as dissociative identity and enslaved mind controlled slaves creation. There's a reason why it's such a prominent part of this type of programming, because it really is that horrible. And so they must make it a big offense so that they can extort. Otherwise, there's no point in creating pedos, which is why I go by what would undermine extortion codes and the solutions to pedophilia that are actually viable are the undermining of extortion codes, because we don't play into the courtesan-partisan division or into the extortion code logic that finances everything but a love that is actually loving, well-being that is actually well-being, success that is actually fulfilling, a legacy that doesn't get twisted and turned after several decades. Okay, nobody thinks about Adolf Hitler as the great liberator of Germany in retrospect. So this is exactly okay, and I dare say, was Rabbi Nachman Beuman in Ukraine? That's the Crimea that the Jews feel more connected to Russia, but the Ukrainians hate the Jews because of. That's the human trafficking by Jews of Jews, but not only Jews. So, was he not a part of like the Epstein like? And that thing is before oil and gas, before NATO, before the existing monarchies, and even the existing aristocracy. The thing is, we cannot create territorial cohesion without turning into extortion cults. Now, in the next episode, I'm going to talk about irrigation. So, so stay tuned.